You are standing in a crowded room. Someone collapses. You look around. Nobody moves. So you don't either. This is not because you are cold. This is not because you don't care. Your brain is running a calculation it inherited from your ancestors. And that calculation is telling you something very specific. It's telling you that if nobody else is reacting, there must be nothing to react to. But the real answer is far stranger than simple indifference. The more people who witness an emergency, the less likely any single person is to help. Not slightly less likely, dramatically less likely. This is one of the most repeated findings in the history of psychology, and it flips everything you'd assume about safety in numbers. Why would more witnesses mean less help? Think about the last time you saw a stranger struggling with something small. A dropped bag, a confusing kiosk, a phone that wouldn't stop ringing in someone's pocket while their hands were full. If you were alone with that stranger, you probably helped without thinking twice. Now add 40 other people to that same sidewalk. Suddenly, the decision doesn't feel automatic anymore. It feels like it belongs to committee, and a committee that never actually meets, never actually decides anything. Let's go back to March of 1964. A young woman named Kitty Genovese was attacked outside her apartment building in Queens, New York. Newspaper reports at the time claimed dozens of neighbors heard her cries and did nothing. Later investigation complicated that story, showing the reporting exaggerated both the number of witnesses and their inaction. But the case still did something important. It pushed two psychologists to ask a question nobody had seriously tested before. Their names were John Darley and Bib Latané. In 1968, they built a series of experiments to find out what actually happens inside a group when something goes wrong. The setup was simple, almost deceptively so. A participant sat alone in a small room, speaking through an intercom to other people seated in separate rooms elsewhere in the building. The participants were told this arrangement protected everyone's anonymity, so they could discuss personal topics without embarrassment. In reality, the other voices on the intercom weren't live at all. They were pre-recorded, and the entire experiment hinged on one voice and what happened to it partway through the conversation. That voice began having what sounded like a seizure. The person choked, gasped, called for help, mentioned dying, and then went silent. The real participant, alone in a room with only a speaker and their own judgment, had to decide what to do. Nobody could see them freeze. Nobody could see them act. The only thing being measured was how quickly, if at all, they left the room to find help. When participants believed they were the only other person listening, 85% of them left the room to get help. Almost everyone acted. But when participants believed 4 other people were also listening, that number collapsed to 31%. Same emergency, same sounds of distress, same amount of time to respond. The only thing that changed was how many other people the participant believed were also listening. Darley and Latané called this diffusion of responsibility. When you're the only witness, the weight of the emergency lands entirely on you. There's no one to share it with, so you carry all of it and you act. But add other witnesses, and something happens beneath your conscious awareness. The responsibility splits. Part of you assumes someone else will step in. Part of you assumes someone else already has. And because every other witness is thinking the exact same thing, nobody moves. Nobody is choosing to be selfish. Everybody is quietly waiting for permission that never arrives. What makes this finding so unsettling is what it implies about the people who don't help. In follow-up interviews, participants in the larger groups weren't calmer about the emergency. Many of them showed physical signs of distress, sweating hands, shaking voices, visible tension, while calmly explaining afterward that they assumed someone else must be handling it. Their bodies knew something was wrong. Their reasoning talked them out of moving. That gap between the body's alarm and the mind's excuse is the entire mechanism, playing out in real time. A decade later, Latané teamed up with another researcher, Steve Nida, to review over 100 separate studies testing this same basic pattern across different situations. Some involved staged accidents, some involved requests for small favors, some involved people simply needing directions. The pattern showed up again and again, strong enough that Nida and Latané concluded the effect was one of the most reliable findings in all of social psychology. There's a second force running alongside this one, and it's just as sneaky. Psychologists call it social proof, and it comes down to a simple survival instinct. When you're uncertain what's happening, you look to other people's reactions to figure out how to feel. Picture the room again. Someone collapses. Your first instinct is alarm, but you glance around and everyone else looks calm. Their faces say this is fine. So your brain quietly overrides your own alarm and matches the group instead. You assume they know something you don't. Maybe this happens all the time. Maybe it's nothing. Here's the twist. Everyone else is doing the exact same thing. They're watching you for a signal too. And because panic is the one emotion people work hardest to hide in public, the room fills with faces performing calm, while every mind behind those faces is quietly screaming. The group looks composed. Nobody inside it feels composed. And that mismatch between what people show and what people feel is exactly what keeps a crowd frozen. This isn't a flaw unique to modern cities or modern strangers. It's ancient. For most of human history, you lived in small bands where everyone knew everyone. Responsibility wasn't ambiguous. If something went wrong near your fire, it was obviously your problem, because there was no one else it could belong to. Groups were small enough that being watched by others reinforced action instead of replacing it. But something changes once a group gets large enough that individuals become anonymous inside it. Your ancestors rarely, if ever, faced a true crowd of strangers. Anthropologists estimate that early human bands typically numbered somewhere between 20 and 50 people, small enough that every member could track every other member's reputation over an entire lifetime. In a group that size, failing to help someone in trouble wasn't just a missed opportunity, it was a permanent mark against you, remembered by everyone, forever. Helping was cheap to enforce and impossible to fake your way out of. Evolution never had to build a mental shortcut for 100 anonymous witnesses, because that situation basically didn't exist until extremely recently in the human timeline. Cities, stadiums, subway platforms, comment sections, all of it is new. So when you find yourself inside a true crowd of strangers now, your brain reaches for the closest tool it has, which is a social calculation built for tiny, tightly bonded groups where reputation was everything and anonymity was almost impossible. And that tool breaks under the weight of a modern crowd, because anonymity removes the very consequence that once made the instinct to help so reliable. For decades after Darley and Latané's original work, some researchers wondered whether the effect might be smaller, or situational, or overstated by a single famous study. So in 2011, a team led by psychologist Peter Fisher pulled together data from over 50 years of bystander research, spanning thousands of participants across dozens of studies. The pattern held. More witnesses, less individual helping, again and again, across different countries, different emergencies, different decades. There was one condition, though, that consistently broke the pattern. When the emergency was unambiguously dangerous, when it was obvious to everyone that this was serious and physically threatening, people helped anyway, regardless of crowd size. The bystander effect thrives on uncertainty. It weakens the moment doubt disappears, which means the antidote isn't courage. It's clarity. If you've ever taken a basic first aid or emergency response course, you may have learned a version of this without realizing why it works. Instructions like, point at one specific person and say their name, or you, call 911, aren't just polite phrasing. They're a direct override of diffusion of responsibility. The moment responsibility has a name attached to it, the ambiguity collapses and the paralysis usually goes with it. Think about how often this quiet freeze shows up in your own life, far outside emergencies. A group project where everyone assumes someone else will send the first email. A group chat where a friend mentions something worrying and 30 people see it and nobody replies, because surely one of the other 29 already reached out. A meeting where everyone privately disagrees with the decision, but nobody says so, because the silence of the room reads as agreement. Every one of these moments runs on the same ancient wiring. You are not less caring in a crowd. You are running an outdated calculation built for a world of 8 people around a fire, Now applied to a world of 800 strangers in a feed. Consider what happens when a post about someone in crisis spreads online. Thousands of people see it within an hour. Logically, this should mean the person gets help almost instantly. Somebody, somewhere among thousands, should reach out. But that's not usually what happens. The visibility itself becomes the trap. Each viewer sees a number in the corner of the screen, hundreds of likes, dozens of comments, and that number quietly whispers the same lie the crowd always whispers. Someone else has already handled this. You scroll past, not because you don't care, but because the sheer size of the audience convinces you your individual action wouldn't matter. It's the same mechanism that once slowed a stranger's hand in a room in 1968, just wearing a different costume. The seizure was audio through an intercom. Now it's a caption under a photo. The room full of silent witnesses used to be physical. Now it's measured in view counts. The wiring underneath hasn't changed at all. So here's what to actually do with this. If you are ever the one who needs help, stop scanning the crowd. Point at one person. Use words like, "You, in the blue jacket, call an ambulance." You are handing them the one thing a crowd instinctively removes: sole responsibility. And if you are ever the one standing in the crowd, watching, uncertain, waiting for someone else's face to tell you what to feel, recognize that everyone around you is doing exactly the same thing. The calm faces are lying. The hesitation is mutual. And the person who breaks that hesitation first isn't necessarily braver than everyone else standing there. They've just remembered something the rest of the crowd forgot: that there is no one else coming unless someone decides to be that person first. You are standing in a crowded room. Someone collapses. You look around. Nobody moves. This time, you understand why. So instead of waiting for the room to decide, you become the reason it finally does. If this changed how you see a crowd, let me know in the comments, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe if you want more of this every week.